Well, in it as well, I'd like to bring them up. Can we?
Yes.
We'd like to bring up Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie. Spencer Jones here and Kim Kerrigan. Put it here.
Imagine a world where reality isn't quite what it seems, a place where technology doesn't just connect us, it redefines what it means to be human. What if the future isn't something we're heading toward, but something we're already living in without even realizing it?
He started his career. I introduced them on their very first television show.
He began his journey in entertainment at an age when most children were still figuring out the world around them. Michael Jackson was just a young boy when he met Diana Ross for the first time. It was in 1969, during the earliest days of what would become one of the most successful music careers of all time. At that point, he was still a member of the Jackson 5, a group formed with his brothers under the guidance of Motown. Diana Ross, already a megastar as the lead singer of The Supremes, played a key role in introducing the Jackson 5 to a wider audience. Motown's official story was that Diana Ross had discovered the Jackson 5 and brought them to the label. In reality, it was Motown producer Bobby Taylor who had first noticed their potential. However, the label saw value in attaching Diana Ross's name to the Jackson 5's launch, using her fame to give the group credibility. She introduced them on their debut television special, The Hollywood Palace, which aired in 1969 and was presented by none other than Diana herself. This marked the beginning of what would become a long and layered relationship between her and Michael. At just 9 years old, Michael was reportedly struck by Diana's presence. To him, she was more than a star. She represented a kind of grace and glamour that felt like it existed in another dimension. In interviews later in his life, he would say that Diana was one of the most important people he ever met. For a child surrounded by the pressures of fame, performance, and family expectations, Diana offered something different. She was a calm and warm presence, someone who, by all accounts, seemed to understand him. As the years went by, Michael and Diana grew closer. By the mid-1970s, when Michael was in his late teens, their bond was described by many around them as intense. In public, their relationship seemed affectionate but professional. However, those who were close to them have often hinted at something deeper, something more emotionally complicated. In 1978, Michael was cast as the Scarecrow in the film adaptation of The Wiz, a reimagining of The Wizard of Oz with an all-black cast. Diana Ross, despite being nearly double the age of the character Dorothy, was cast in that role. The casting was controversial at the time, but Diana's influence in the entertainment industry made it happen. During filming in New York, Michael and Diana reportedly lived in the same apartment building. Some accounts suggest that Michael moved in with Diana during production. Whether or not that's fully accurate remains unclear, but what is clear is that their time filming The Wiz only strengthened their connection. Friends of Michael's, as well as members of his inner circle, have often described Diana as someone Michael looked up to. Not in the way a fan idolizes a star, but in the way someone latches onto a figure who seems to represent emotional safety. Michael's childhood was marked by intense rehearsals, strict discipline from his father, and the isolating effects of early fame. Diana, by contrast, offered moments of laughter, mentorship, and attention that didn't come with the same level of pressure or expectation. Throughout this period, Michael's own interviews began to reflect just how much she meant to him. He would often call her his mother, sister, and friend. There was a consistent theme in the way he spoke about her, admiration mixed with deep emotional reliance. He once said that Diana was someone he loved with all his heart, but he never clarified exactly what that meant. The public watched them with curiosity. Rumors naturally started to spread. Some speculated that Michael had a crush on Diana. Others believed it was more complicated than that, possibly even romantic. But both of them, whenever asked directly, would deny there was anything more than friendship between them. Still, people who knew Michael well have said otherwise. They describe a young man who was not only fascinated by Diana's talent and beauty, but also emotionally dependent on her in a way that went beyond simple admiration. It's been suggested that she was one of the few people he trusted completely during those early years. There are several anecdotes that hint at just how significant Diana's presence was in his life. One such moment came during the early 1980s. By this time, Michael had already released Off the Wall and was preparing for Thriller, the album that would change pop music forever. Even as he was becoming a global icon, he was still phoning Diana regularly, sometimes late at night, just to talk. According to people close to them, these conversations could last for hours. For Michael, who was notoriously shy and often withdrawn in personal settings, Diana was one of the few people with whom he felt safe enough to fully open up. Their relationship had a complexity to it. It wasn't defined by labels. Michael didn't describe her as a best friend or a romantic partner in the usual sense. She was, as he once put it, everything, and that was both confusing and comforting to him. It's important to recognize that during this time, Michael was navigating intense internal pressures. He was trying to shape his identity in a world that scrutinized his every move. Diana, meanwhile, was moving through her own career shifts, stepping into acting and maintaining her status as a music legend. Despite their individual paths, they remained tethered in a way that felt unshakable. Unshakable? To many on the outside, their bond didn't make sense. The age difference, their busy schedules, and their guarded personal lives didn't lend themselves to an easy narrative, but that might be exactly why the connection mattered so much to Michael. It was a rare constant in a life where almost everything else seemed to change rapidly. Some journalists at the time noted how visibly Michael would light up when Diana's name came up in interviews. Others mentioned how often he brought her up unprompted. There was no indication that he did this for publicity. If anything, Michael was extremely private about the things that mattered most to him. Their relationship never seemed to follow the traditional trajectory of celebrity friendships. There were no public fallouts, no tabloid feuds, no dramatic reconciliations. Instead, what existed between them appeared to be a deeply rooted, almost invisible understanding. Something quietly powerful and mutually acknowledged, but never fully explained. By the end of the 1970s, Diana had become more than just a mentor or a celebrity figure in Michael's world. She had become a kind of emotional anchor. Whether or not that connection was ever romantic remains a point of speculation, but what's clear is that it was emotionally significant to him. Meeting Diana Ross at just 9 years old might have been one of the first times Michael encountered someone who truly saw him beyond his talent, someone who didn't just expect him to perform, but allowed him to be, even for a moment, a child. That encounter, and everything that followed, would shape much of the emotional narrative of his life, from how he expressed love in his music to how he chose to manage his personal relationships. This bond, mysterious and undefined, remained one of the few threads that consistently ran through his public and private life. In many ways, Diana Ross became a symbol in Michael's story, not just of fame and glamour, but of something deeper, more personal, and far less understood. The movement of the Mongols into Eastern Europe marked one of the most dramatic and far-reaching military expansions in history. It began in the early 13th century, at a time when most European kingdoms had little knowledge of what lay beyond the eastern steppes. Led by Genghis Khan and later his descendants, the Mongols launched a campaign that would shake the foundations of medieval Europe. As usual, the most important movement, one of the first serious encounters between the Mongols and European forces, happened in 1223 at the Battle of the Kalka River. The Mongols, having already subdued large parts of Central Asia, moved westward and encountered a coalition of Rus principalities and Cuman allies. Despite being outnumbered, the Mongols used deception and speed to overwhelm the coalition. They lured the Rus forces into a trap, feigning retreat and drawing them into a narrow valley. Once inside, the Mongols surrounded and destroyed the Rus army. The defeat was not just military but also psychological. European leaders began to realize that these steppe warriors were unlike anything they had faced before. After the victory at Kalka, the Mongols pulled back from Eastern Europe for a time. This retreat wasn't due to weakness or defeat, but rather part of a broader Mongol strategy. They often conducted reconnaissance in-force missions, where initial attacks were designed to gather intelligence, test enemy defenses, and prepare the ground for a larger invasion. These early skirmishes also gave the Mongols valuable insight into the political fragmentation and lack of coordination among the various European states. The real Mongol invasion of Eastern Europe began in 1236, under the leadership of Batu Khan, a grandson of Genghis Khan. He was accompanied by the experienced general Subutai, who had served under Genghis Khan himself and was widely regarded as one of the greatest military minds of the age. Their target was not just one country or kingdom, but an entire region, stretching from modern-day Russia to Hungary and Poland. In 1237, the Mongols invaded the principalities of Rus. Their campaign was methodical and ruthless. Cities such as Ryazan, Kolomna, and Vladimir were besieged and burned. The Mongols brought with them not only highly mobile cavalry, but also skilled siege engineers, many of whom had been recruited or captured during earlier campaigns in China and the Islamic world. These engineers used advanced siege technologies, including catapults and trebuchets, to break through fortified cities. The destruction was immense. Chroniclers from the time speak of entire towns being reduced to ash and thousands of people killed or taken as slaves. Yet, despite this brutality, the Mongols were also strategic in their approach. In some cases, cities that surrendered early were spared mass slaughter. The Mongols valued submission over annihilation and often incorporated the local elites into their administrative system, so long as they pledged loyalty and paid tribute. By 1240, the Mongols had captured Kiev, one of the most important cultural and political centers of the Eastern Slavic world. Its fall marked the near-total subjugation of the Rus principalities. Many of these regions would remain under Mongol influence for over 2 centuries, during what became known as the Tatar yoke. With Eastern Europe largely subdued, Batu Khan turned his attention westward. In 1241, the Mongols launched a coordinated invasion of Central Europe. Their forces split into 3 main groups, targeting Poland, Hungary, and Transylvania simultaneously. This multi-pronged attack was a classic example of Mongol military strategy, designed to divide and overwhelm enemy forces before they could unite. In Poland, Mongol troops under the command of Baidar and Ordar Khan achieved a swift and brutal victory at the Battle of Legnica. European knights, despite their armor and experience, were no match for the fast-moving Mongol horse archers. The Mongols again used deception, feigned retreats, and encirclement to devastating effect. The Polish army, led by Duke Henry II, was crushed. His death on the battlefield sent shock waves through the region. Meanwhile, another Mongol army invaded Hungary. At the time, Hungary was a rising power in Europe, ruled by King Bela IV. However, internal divisions and a recent influx of Cuman refugees made the kingdom vulnerable. The Cumans, fleeing the Mongols, had been given refuge by the Hungarian king, which may have contributed to the Mongols' decision to attack. The decisive battle came in April 1241 at the Battle of Mohi, also known as the Battle of the Seho River. The Hungarian army had taken a defensive position near a river crossing, hoping to stop the Mongol advance. However, the Mongols executed a brilliant flanking maneuver. While part of their force attacked the bridge head-on, another contingent crossed the river at a different point and struck the Hungarian camp from the rear. The result was catastrophic. The Hungarian army was encircled and destroyed. King Bela barely escaped with his life. In a matter of months, the Mongols had annihilated 2 major European armies and left vast swaths of territory in ruins. The cities of Pest, Esztergom, and many others were sacked and burned. Thousands were killed and countless more were displaced. European leaders were stunned. The Pope called for prayer and penance, while various monarchs scrambled to strengthen their defences. The fear that the Mongols would continue westward and attack Germany, Italy, or France was very real. Yet, in an unexpected turn of events, the Mongol advance suddenly stopped in 1242. The reason was not military defeat, but rather a political shift. News reached Batu Khan that the great Khan Ogadai had died in Karakoram, the Mongol capital. According to Mongol tradition, all major princes of the royal family were required to return and take part in the selection of the new great Khan. Batu Khan chose to withdraw his forces and head east, abandoning further plans to invade Western Europe. This withdrawal was not necessarily permanent, but it gave Europe time to regroup. Although the Mongols maintained their hold over the Rus and exerted influence over neighbouring regions, they never again launched a full-scale invasion into the heart of Europe. Some historians argue that if Ogadai had lived a few more years, the Mongols might have pushed all the way to the Atlantic. In the years following the invasion, the impact of the Mongols on Eastern Europe remained profound. The Rus principalities, though eventually regaining autonomy, were reshaped by Mongol political structures and tax systems. Trade routes that had once flowed through Byzantium shifted towards the Mongol-controlled territories, connecting Europe more directly with Central Asia and China. This opened up opportunities for cultural exchange and the movement of goods, ideas, and technologies. At the same time, the memory of the Mongol invasions left a lasting scar. Stories of entire cities vanishing overnight, of arrows falling like rain, and of unstoppable horsemen riding from the east became embedded in European folklore and historical writing. The Mongols were often portrayed as a divine punishment, a scourge brought upon sinful peoples. But over time, more nuanced views emerged, recognizing their organizational skill, adaptability, and influence on the medieval world. Ultimately, the Mongol expansion into Eastern Europe was not just a series of battles and conquests. It marked a moment when the East collided with the West, not just in war, but in diplomacy, trade, and culture. While the devastation was immense, the legacy was complex. The Mongol Empire helped shape the course of European development, often in ways that were not immediately obvious. From the ashes of burned cities rose new centers of power, and from the chaos of invasion came new connections across continents. The economic strategies and military ambitions of Nazi Germany were closely intertwined, and both were deeply influenced by Hitler's worldview and ideological goals. In the years leading up to World War II, Germany underwent a rapid transformation as the Nazi regime prepared the country for a large-scale conflict. This preparation involved a mixture of economic manipulation, industrial policy, foreign trade arrangements, and rearmament, together forming what historians often refer to as a war economy. Although the war had not yet begun, the groundwork laid in this period would prove essential to Germany's initial military successes. By 1936, the Nazi leadership began to turn away from peacetime economic priorities and focused instead on making Germany self-sufficient and ready for war. One of the most significant developments during this time was the introduction of the Four-Year Plan. Launched in October 1936 under the direction of Hermann Göring, this plan aimed to prepare the German economy for war within 4 years. It focused on increasing agricultural production, expanding raw material supplies within German borders, and building up armaments production. Göring, who was given sweeping powers to enforce the plan, quickly became one of the most powerful men in the regime. The Four-Year Plan marked a departure from traditional economic practices. It gave the state extensive control over private industry and dictated the direction of economic activity based on strategic goals rather than market forces. Heavy investment was made in sectors critical for warfare, such as steel, chemicals, and synthetic materials. One of the plan's major goals was to reduce Germany's dependence on imported raw materials. This led to massive investments in synthetic substitutes for rubber, petrol, and other strategic resources. Companies like IG Farben, which specialized in chemical manufacturing, played a central role in these efforts. The concept of autarky, or national self-sufficiency, was heavily promoted. This was not simply an economic strategy, it was rooted in the Nazi belief that Germany needed to be able to survive and thrive without relying on foreign countries. This thinking aligned with Hitler's broader expansionist ideology. He believed that Germany needed more territory to secure resources and provide living space, Lebensraum, for the German people. Therefore, economic policy was seen as a tool to enable future military conquest and long-term dominance. At the same time, Nazi Germany was secretly violating the Treaty of Versailles, which had imposed severe restrictions on the country's ability to rearm after World War I. Hitler believed that a strong military was essential, not only for national pride but also for carrying out his vision of a new European order. From the mid-1930s onwards, rearmament accelerated. Military spending consumed an increasingly large share of national output, and new weapons were developed at a fast pace. By the late 1930s, the German army had grown significantly in both size and capability, despite international agreements forbidding such growth. The German military buildup was not just about quantity, but also about strategy and modernization. The concept of blitzkrieg, or lightning war, was being developed during this period. This new form of warfare relied on speed, coordination, and surprise. It combined the use of fast-moving tanks, mechanized infantry, and air support to break through enemy lines quickly and encircle opposing forces. This strategy would be used with devastating effect during the early years of World War II. To support the growing war machine, Germany had to secure foreign resources. The Nazi regime engaged in a variety of trade agreements and diplomatic maneuvers to obtain essential materials like oil, iron ore, and rubber. For example, Germany maintained important economic relationships with countries such as Romania and the Soviet Union. These arrangements allowed Germany to access vital resources while it continued its preparations for war. One of the most notable agreements was the German-Soviet Trade Agreement of 1939, which provided Germany with oil, grain, and other raw materials in exchange for machinery and manufactured goods. Meanwhile, within Germany itself, the mobilization of the economy had wide-reaching effects on society. The government implemented policies to control labor and production. Workers were directed into industries deemed essential for national defense. Strikes and labor unions were banned, and the Nazi-controlled German Labor Front took control of workplace conditions and employment policies. This centralized control helped maintain productivity and ensure that resources were allocated according to the regime's priorities. In terms of financing the war preparations, the Nazi government employed a combination of deficit spending, credit manipulation, and innovative financial instruments. One notable method was the use of MIFO bills, a system of promissory notes used to pay armaments manufacturers while keeping the spending off official government budgets. This allowed the regime to rearm rapidly without causing a noticeable spike in inflation or attracting too much international attention. Although these economic and military efforts gave Germany a temporary advantage at the beginning of the war, they came at a cost. The focus on rearmament and autarky left many areas of the economy underdeveloped and vulnerable. Consumer goods production was neglected, living standards were kept artificially low, and economic growth became increasingly dependent on military expansion. By the end of the 1930s, Germany was heavily reliant on continued conquest to sustain its economy. This reliance would later contribute to its downfall once military setbacks began and access to foreign resources was cut off. Furthermore, the militarization of the economy helped to solidify the Nazi regime's grip on power. The state's close relationship with industrialists and large corporations created a network of interests that benefited from government contracts and subsidies. Many business leaders became complicit in the regime's policies, either out of ideological alignment or economic self-interest. This partnership between the state and big business was instrumental in facilitating the regime's war preparations. It's also important to note that while economic and military preparations were happening in full force, Nazi propaganda was working to prepare the population mentally for conflict. Through films, newspapers, and rallies, the regime promoted the idea that Germany was surrounded by enemies and needed to defend itself. National unity, sacrifice, and readiness for war were recurring themes. The education system and youth organizations like the Hitler Youth also played a key role in shaping the attitudes of younger generations, ensuring that they would be willing to serve and fight when the time came. With more countries launching their own central bank digital currency projects, the global financial landscape is experiencing a shift that was once only theoretical. One of the most prominent developments in this space is the emergence of the digital euro. The European Central Bank has been carefully researching and testing this concept. Over the past few years, the digital euro is not meant to replace cash, but to complement it, offering a new payment method that aligns with the changing habits of consumers. As more people use cards, smartphones, and digital wallets to make payments, the ECB wants to ensure that central bank money remains relevant and accessible in a digitized society. According to the ECB, the digital euro will be widely accessible to citizens and businesses and could be used for everyday transactions, both online and offline. It would essentially function like a digital form of cash, issued by the central bank and guaranteed by the public sector. This is in contrast to privately issued cryptocurrencies or stablecoins, which often carry higher risk and lack the backing of a sovereign institution. One of the key motivations for the ECB is maintaining the autonomy of the European payment system. Currently, a large portion of digital transactions in Europe are processed by non-European companies. The ECB wants to make sure Europe retains control over its payment infrastructure and does not become overly dependent on foreign providers. Another factor behind the digital euro is financial inclusion. Although Europe has a high level of banking access, there are still certain groups, such as the elderly, people in rural areas, or those with limited digital skills, who may be excluded from the rapid move toward digitization. The ECB emphasizes that the digital euro must be easy to use and accessible to everyone. This is why they are considering features like offline payment capabilities and no need for a bank account in some use cases. Privacy is also a major concern. One of the criticisms leveled at digital currencies is the potential for government overreach and mass surveillance. The ECB has stated that privacy is a top priority and that users of the digital euro would enjoy a level of privacy similar to that of cash, though not necessarily full anonymity. Especially for large transactions, the aim is to strike a balance between protecting personal data and ensuring compliance with anti-money laundering regulations. In terms of the technical setup, the ECB is exploring various architectures for the digital euro. This includes a centralized system operated by the euro system, as well as decentralized options or hybrid models that involve intermediaries like banks and payment service providers. During its investigation phase, the ECB worked with stakeholders from the private sector to test possible prototypes and to understand how the digital euro could fit into existing infrastructure. The transition toward implementation is expected to take several years, with public consultations, legislative changes, and coordination with other EU institutions all forming part of the roadmap. In October 2023, the ECB concluded its 2-year investigation phase and entered a new preparation phase. This will involve finalizing the design, working out the regulatory framework, and launching more in-depth tests. The earliest the digital euro could realistically be launched is around the end of the decade. Across the Atlantic, the United States has taken a more cautious approach. The Federal Reserve has been conducting research into a potential digital dollar, but there is no firm timeline or commitment to issuing one. Fed Chair Jerome Powell has stated that the US Central Bank will not proceed without clear support from Congress and the White House. The digital dollar would need to be carefully designed to ensure it supports financial stability and innovation without crowding out the private sector or infringing on civil liberties. One of the major concerns raised in US debates is how a central bank digital currency might affect commercial banks. If people were able to hold accounts directly with the Fed, there's a risk it could lead to a flight of deposits from commercial banks, especially during periods of financial uncertainty. This could reduce the availability of credit in the economy. Some experts suggest that the digital dollar could be designed as a two-tier system, where banks and other regulated intermediaries distribute and manage digital dollars on behalf of the Fed. This would mirror how physical cash is currently distributed. Another key issue in the US discussion is privacy. Given the importance of civil liberties in American political culture, any digital dollar proposal would likely include strong protections to prevent government surveillance. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have expressed concern about the potential misuse of a CBDC, and some have even proposed legislation to ban the Fed from issuing a retail digital currency. While the Fed has made no final decision, pilot programs and ongoing research indicate that the idea is still being explored. For now, the digital dollar remains a hypothetical project, albeit one with significant implications if it moves forward. In Asia, several countries have made notable progress. China's digital yuan, officially known as the ECNY, is perhaps the most advanced among the major economies. The People's Bank of China has been testing the digital currency in multiple cities since 2020. Unlike cryptocurrencies, the digital yuan is centrally controlled and issued by the state. It is designed for retail use and is already being used for payments in shops, public transport, and even wages in some cases. The Chinese government sees the digital yuan as a way to modernize the economy, improve financial inclusion, and reduce reliance on the US dollar. The ECNY is integrated with popular platforms like Alipay and WeChat Pay, though it is still separate from them. Adoption has been gradual, and many users still prefer existing digital payment apps, but the government is actively promoting the digital yuan with incentives and policy support. Other countries in Asia are also moving forward. India has begun piloting its digital rupee, with both wholesale and retail versions under testing. The Reserve Bank of India is looking to improve the efficiency of its payment systems and expand financial access. Japan, meanwhile, is conducting experiments with its digital yen in partnership with private financial institutions, though no firm date has been set for a rollout. In the Middle East, the United Arab Emirates is collaborating with other countries on cross-border CBDC initiatives. The UAE has been part of Project mBridge, a joint effort with China, Thailand, and Hong Kong, aiming to streamline international payments between central banks using blockchain technology. Africa has also seen experimentation with CBDCs. Nigeria launched the e-Naira in 2021, making it one of the first countries in the world to issue a digital currency. However, adoption has been slow, in part due to limited public trust and challenges with user experience. The Central Bank of Nigeria has been updating the platform and encouraging more use cases, but it faces an uphill battle in gaining widespread public acceptance. The case of the Bahamas shows a different side of the CBDC story. The sand dollar was introduced in 2020 as a way to improve financial inclusion across the country's many islands, some of which lack traditional banking infrastructure. The sand dollar has seen more positive reception in certain areas and remains one of the most mature CBDCs in the world today. These global developments show that central banks are increasingly interested in digital currencies, but each is moving at its own pace and responding to its own domestic needs. Some see CBDCs as a way to counter the influence of cryptocurrencies, while others see them as an opportunity to modernize payment systems and promote financial inclusion. The technology and policy questions are complex, and there is no one-size-fits-all solution. What is becoming clear, however, is that digital currencies are no longer a futuristic concept. They are gradually becoming a real part of the financial ecosystem, with governments playing a central role in shaping how money will work in the years ahead. Whether through full implementation or continued exploration, the digital shift is well underway. The tension surrounding the unfolding events remains high, with international scrutiny intensifying and the situation on the ground becoming increasingly volatile. The dynamics between state institutions, international bodies, and independent journalists continue to shift in unpredictable ways. Throughout the coverage of the conflict, independent media outlets found themselves under immense pressure. While many attempted to maintain impartiality, others were accused of bias or manipulation. Certain news organizations had their broadcasts blocked or restricted in particular regions, citing concerns about misinformation or incitement. This led to debates about censorship, freedom of the press, and the role of media in wartime. In some areas, journalists risked their lives to provide on-the-ground footage and first-hand reports, often operating in extremely dangerous and politically sensitive environments. One of the most controversial developments was the crackdown on dissent within regions directly affected by the conflict. Reports emerged of individuals being arrested for social media posts, public protests, or even private conversations perceived as critical of the official narrative. In several documented cases, those detained faced lengthy interrogations or were held without formal charges. This created a chilling effect, with many people self-censoring or withdrawing from public discourse entirely. Civil society groups and human rights organizations raised alarms about the erosion of basic freedoms and the rise of a surveillance-heavy security state. Alongside these developments, humanitarian organizations struggled to access conflict zones to provide aid to civilians. Roads were blocked, air routes were restricted, and in some cases humanitarian convoys were turned back or detained. This led to shortages of essential supplies such as food, clean water, and medical equipment. The consequences were dire, particularly for vulnerable populations including children, the elderly, and those with chronic illnesses. Several international charities called for temporary ceasefires to allow the delivery of humanitarian aid, though these appeals often went unheeded. In diplomatic circles, back-channel communications became increasingly important. While official dialogues between states remained stalled or contentious, informal channels allowed for limited cooperation on issues such as prisoner exchanges or the repatriation of bodies. These small-scale agreements were often mediated by neutral third parties, including non-governmental organizations or states not directly involved in the conflict. Although such efforts were limited in scope, they represented rare moments of pragmatism amidst broader hostilities. Meanwhile, economic fallout from the conflict began to ripple across global markets. Countries heavily reliant on imports or exports tied to the affected regions saw significant disruptions. Commodities such as fuel, grain, and essential minerals experienced price fluctuations, causing concern in both developed and developing economies. Inflation rose in several countries, partly due to supply chain instability and partly due to investor uncertainty. Policymakers struggled to maintain economic stability while managing public opinion and political pressure at home. On social media, digital activism surged. Hashtags, viral videos, and coordinated online campaigns shaped public opinion and brought new attention to aspects of the conflict that were underreported in mainstream media. However, these platforms also became breeding grounds for misinformation, polarization, and even hate speech. Tech companies were urged to take stronger action to remove harmful content, but their efforts were uneven and often met with criticism from multiple sides. Algorithms amplified extreme views, and coordinated disinformation campaigns exploited these systems to push particular narratives. The educational sector also felt the impact of the conflict. In affected regions, schools and universities were forced to close or shift to remote learning under unstable conditions. Students experienced interruptions to their education, with long-term consequences that may take years to fully understand. Elsewhere, educational institutions faced pressure to take a stand or adapt their curricula to reflect the realities of the conflict. Debates erupted about the role of education in shaping political understanding, national identity, and historical memory. In the arts and culture scene, reactions to the conflict were equally complex. Some artists produced work that directly engaged with the themes of war, displacement, and identity, using their platforms to advocate for peace or justice. Others found their projects cancelled or defunded due to political sensitivities or allegations of taking the wrong side. Cultural institutions were caught in the middle, trying to balance freedom of expression with public and governmental expectations. Museums, galleries, and performance venues became unexpected battlegrounds for ideological disputes. The legal ramifications of the conflict also began to unfold. International courts received petitions to investigate potential war crimes and violations of international humanitarian law. Legal experts debated the applicability of various statutes and conventions, including the Geneva Conventions and the Rome Statute. While some legal proceedings moved forward, others were mired in bureaucracy and diplomatic friction. Victims and their families often expressed frustration at the slow pace of justice and the perception that accountability was elusive. Amidst all of this, stories of individual resilience and courage provided a glimmer of hope. Volunteers helped evacuate civilians from dangerous areas. Doctors and nurses worked around the clock in makeshift clinics. Community leaders organized local support networks to ensure that basic needs were met. These acts, though often overlooked in broader analyses, played a crucial role in sustaining morale and reinforcing a sense of shared humanity. As the conflict entered a protracted phase, calls for a negotiated resolution grew louder. Several international forums convened to explore possible frameworks for peace, though major sticking points remained unresolved. The path to reconciliation appeared long and fraught, requiring not just political will, but also a societal reckoning with the causes and consequences of the conflict. Analysts emphasized that rebuilding trust would be as important as rebuilding infrastructure. In conclusion, the final stage of the conflict's narrative is not just about military outcomes or political statements. It is about the ways in which societies respond to crises, how institutions either rise to the occasion or falter, and how ordinary people find ways to adapt, resist, or endure. The legacy of such conflicts is rarely confined to battlefield victories or diplomatic resolutions. It is written in the stories of displaced families, the shuttered schools, the fractured friendships, and the quiet acts of bravery that go unnoticed. As the world watches and debates, those living through the crisis carry on, one day at a time, navigating a reality that is far more complex than headlines can capture.